Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. Last week I reviewed the first issue of a Gargoyles comic set early in the animated series run. But what we're looking at today takes place at the tail end of it. As such, for context, I'll be bringing up stuff that happened across more than 50 episodes that I really recommend watching if you haven't already. Not so much to avoid inevitable spoilers in today's episode, but because the show is great and I think its events should be experienced as they unfold. Also, you should always anticipate that I expect you to watch cartoons as they pertain to my show. To sum up, Matt Bluestone learns gargoyles are real and becomes a trusted ally. Goliath, Bronx, and Elisa went on a kind of world tour, traveling to various locales at the behest of mystical forces to lend aid. Kinda like Quantum Leap, but less time travel. They pick up a new clan member, Angela, whose egg survived the Castle Wyvern attack and would live on an island where time moved slower than the rest of the world. When she arrived in Manhattan, the trio briefly competed for her affection, being the only gargoyle they'd seen in 1,000 years that wasn't a magical alteration or an enemy, but she did set them straight. Xanatos got married, became a father, and eased back on villainy, even letting the clan return to Castle Wyvern. Season 3 saw some retooling, going from national syndication to weekly airings on ABC's Saturday morning slot, and retitled Gargoyles: The Goliath Chronicles. It is the Dragon Ball GT of the franchise. Each episode began with Goliath waxing poetic about something vaguely plot-related. After a new remix of the show's opening theme, it's not bad, but doesn't quite beat the original. The concepts behind most episodes are fine, but they suffer from a drop in animation quality, perhaps moved to a different studio, so Brooklyn gets miscolored in one shot, and Elisa's red jacket has a muddy brown sheen. Weird, choppy editing made moments flow poorly and look awkward, and there were some lines that had odd delivery, like they didn't use the best take.
Jalapeno, that helicopter's annoying.
Somehow, none of this garnered another season. Why do I bring all this up? As mentioned last week, there's a new Gargoyles comic currently out by Greg Weisman, intended to continue the series. Something he tried before in 2006, 10 years after the Goliath Chronicles premiered. The first 2 issues are essentially the first episode of that season, which Weisman wrote. Kind of like when I was in high school, and in 2 different years taking classes taught by the same teacher, I got the same assignment of translating part of a classic Shakespearean play into modern vernacular, and I ended up using the same scene the same way both times. Where's my animated series deal? I'm taking issue with Gargoyles from Slave Labor Graphics, issues 1 and 2. So let's see if the regrettable season's premiere episode does better in comic form. Issue 1's cover is a nice, uncomplicated image to get your attention. Goliath, Angela, and Brooklyn awakening from their stone slumber. As mentioned before, creator Greg Weisman pens the series with art by Will Terrell and David Hedgecock. David. We begin with on-the-street interviews of background characters that have been featured throughout the series. A woman fearful for her kids, a jogger recommending dissection to find out what they are, and Vinny Grigori, who says he lost his job because of them, but managed to hunt one down and get revenge.
Believe me, playing ding-dong ditch on a clock tower isn't easy, but they looked so confused through my binoculars, it was totally worth it.
This is the opener to the new show Night Watch, with host Travis Marshall. He shows footage of the gargoyles flying from their secret lair atop the police precinct after its destruction via explosion. They microwaved a popcorn bag with the wrong side facing up. In the cartoon, the interview portion came after the recap of the Season 2 finale. Both ways work fine, but I could see the comic's framing being more likely used in an actual broadcast, like they're trying to draw in viewers by making them ask, "What are these people talking about?" or something like that. Anyway, the host asks Matt Bluestone if these beings are dangerous, and as the head of the NYPD's Gargoyle Task Force, which is one word for some reason, he replies there's no evidence they're a threat, so everyone should remain calm. As to rumors that Xanatos is harboring them in his skyscraper, the Erie building, the detective states they're following all leads. "We keep getting crank calls from drunk frat boys with phony tips. Last night, officers spent 2 hours trying to find a gargoyle smuggling suspect named Maya Crackleaks." Hudson, Goliath, and David have watched the broadcast inside the castle, the latter assuring that when he's reached for comment, he'll think of something like always. And, wow, this is odd. Brooklyn's got his wings folded under his arms, unlike the more cape-like approach most gargoyles employ. Odd choice, and you'd think it'd be pretty uncomfortable. Maybe he's working on mastering double armpit farts. A helicopter passes by the castle, failing to find any targets, and takes off for a meeting hosted by their boss, conveniently missing Goliath and the others walking to the roof of the turret. Brooklyn's concerned Xanatos might have another scheme in the works, but the two older warriors trust that he won't destroy them while they're stone. And it's not like there's anywhere else they can go.
Apartments.com offered us nothing. You have failed us, Jeff Goldblum!
Goliath prepares to take flight, but his clanmates worry he'll be spotted and add to the city's tension. He shuts them down by saying he's going to see Elisa, and the two acquiesce, though still visibly concerned. I don't know, what with the moon looking like it's about to crash into the earth, I figure New Yorkers have bigger problems.
You throw another moon at me, and I'm gonna lose it.
The following couple of pages are something not seen in the show, Goliath being shot at by someone from an apartment window. The man loses sight of him, thinking maybe he scared him off, until Goliath is seen clinging to the wall above, stating his kind do not scare easily.
Except that movie Ernest Scared Stupid. It still gives me stone mares.
That said, since gargoyles aren't the human's enemy, he has no reason to be frightened either. The man confirms he understands, so Goliath lets him keep his weapon, which he's bent back into a swirl before gliding on. It's a fun scene, showing our hero isn't needlessly violent, but nor is he to be trifled with. We go to Vinny arriving at an address he's been looking for. John Castaway, the man who messaged him, awaits in the doorway, having been impressed by Vinny's appearance on the news, and wants him to join his group. He takes him inside and shuts the door, which has a hammer emblem on it.
It's a cult trying to convince the world that Thor Love and Thunder wasn't that bad. Run, Vinny, run for your life!
Goliath arrives outside Elisa's top-floor apartment, which even she thinks isn't a bright move, and in a kind of awkward progression, we go from right to left for the dialogue. Feels like the pacing may have been improved with another panel. Anyway, at the secret meeting, Castaway says his guests may be reasonable people, but the world they live in isn't. Racism, violence, injustice, and other struggles they deal with can make them feel alone. But they aren't alone in their fear, as he pulls a tarp off a stone statue of an exaggeratedly menacing gargoyle.
It's like if Coffee and Nightmares had a baby.
Goliath is feeling rather alone himself, expositing his clan's backstory while mixing in a dash of narration from Season 2's opening theme. Betrayal by humans, most of his clan shattered, heroic shenanigans ensue. We know this, Elisa knows this, but really it's for the sake of new readers. Maz's friendship is what made Goliath believe they'd made a new life protecting New York City, but now he doesn't feel humans will give him any peace. Elisa says he's just tired and maybe things will look better after some sleep. If not, she has the next night off, which they can use to make things better. I mean, how difficult can it be to purge an entire metropolitan city of ignorance and prejudice of a species they never knew was hiding in the shadows of their everyday lives? A little coffee, some spreadsheets, and a brainstorming session? I bet this whole thing gets resolved with a 30-minute webinar. Weird how Goliath looks above her head. You'd think given this tender moment they'd make eye contact. Back to Castaway's stochastic terrorism, asking the crowd if they think the gargoyles are dangerous, will steal their children, and in another deviation from the show, most respond yes, but Vinny kind of dissents, not entirely agreeing, though joins them in affirming the goyles must be stopped. Castaway dons a hood, because he's not that subtle of a villain, and invites them to join the Quarrymen. The citizens eagerly accept his hoods and electrically charged hammers as Casty McNasty demonstrates the power of their weapons, destroying the garish statue with one hit. That's kind of an insult to the guy who did all that carving, isn't it? Other than looking all flashy, I don't think the electricity does much, since stone is generally not a good conductor, and the hammer itself does all the work anyway. But hey, it was an easy excuse for the statue exploding in the cartoon. Something else not from the show, a scene at the police department undergoing repairs. Bluestone is at the captain's desk when Captain Maria Chavez arrives with crutches, apparently injured in the explosion. She's updated on the gargoyle situation, some vandalized statues, some false alarms, and a lot of scared people. As for Xanatos, Matt says he and Elisa have been up to the castle, and there's nothing unusual to report. Suits of armor, a big dungeon, bags full of money lying around, a TV that encompasses an entire wall, a solid gold statue of Milton Berle. You know, standard rich guy stuff. As the sun begins setting, Elisa's cat, Cagney, wakes her up for some food, and she prepares for her winged friend to awaken.
Sit tight, Goliath. I'll be showered and dressed before you wake up.
The statue can't hear you, silly lady. Not through glass that far away, duh. Unfortunately, a quarryman helicopter has spotted our slumbering hero, informed by their leader to destroy it, even if it's not real, and that he's arriving with backup. Why? Whether it's real or not, you expect it to be destroyed by the time you get there, right? What's the point of you being present after the fact, much less bringing backup? Maybe he just wants in the action, because outside his headquarters, Vinny arrives to tell Castaway that someone else saw him on TV and offered him a job in Japan. Because it's just that easy, I guess. The boss bigot wants to take the young man along, since he's hunted gargoyles before, but then Vinny admits his revenge was more mild than he had let on, just slightly humiliating his target. And despite having been fairly on board with the quarryman's mission statement earlier,
I'm not sure all this hammer stuff is necessary.
You may not think yourself a hammer man, Vinny, but the rest of us feel that we are too legit to quit.
Dang, I'm old. Masking up, Castaway says he'll see the necessity by joining him, and after a moment, Vinny enters the van filled with like-suited goons. Elisa is ready, in a very different dress than the show, when she hears a copter outside and sees a masked figure descending toward Goliath. Before the creep can use his wannabe Mjolnir, Maza charges him, making him drop it as she presses her attack. This confirms that the stone figure is a genuine Goyle, making it all the sweeter for the aggressor. This is a man who has been disappointed by piñatas for their inability to feel pain. Apparently, he assumes there's a thing between her and Goliath by almost calling her a not nice word beginning with W, but she decks him, leaving him phased for the moment. She reaches for his weapon, only for a quarry woman to descend the aircraft with a gun trained on her, telling her to back off.
Only quarrymen are licensed to pile drive. You have to sit through an entire fear-mongering seminar and sign an NDA. Even then, it's more a certificate than a license, but still.
She tells her cohort to finish what he started, but just as he's picking up his hammer, Goliath wakes up with his usual dramatic roar. You cannot imagine the morning breath that comes with it. Or would it be evening breath in this case? Warned by Elisa, he dodges hammer swings and gunfire before throwing one enemy at the other. When the helicopter starts laser blasting them, he scoops the detective up and starts gliding in retreat. The two goons climb aboard and the chopper gives pursuit to the city, missing Goliath with every shot, until the final page, where the beam hits his wing. And because irony or something, the final panel is the host saying, "Welcome back." Welcome back from that 18-hour commercial break. Issue 2's cover has Elisa opening fire at some off-screen target while carried by Goliath, whose injuries have moved to his other wing for some reason. Also, a portion of Elisa's dress has been used to wrap around what is essentially the forearm of his wing. Did she break through the membrane to treat him? Is that what they teach at Gargoyle Medical School?
Why would you think that's unnecessary?
Anyway, Hudson is settling in for some TV.
Tonight, on a special edition of Night Watch, lenticular covers, extra pages, and because you demanded it, my intern will die. Oh? You'll do as you're told, Ricky.
Actually, it's a live debate on the gargoyle problem between Assistant DA and Gargoyle Task Force Advisor Margot Yale and medieval scholar Lennox Macduff, which is an alias of Macbeth, a one-time adversary to the clan. He suggests greeting gargoyles with tolerance, which Margot finds preposterous, having encountered them a few times in the show, and considers them monsters. Meanwhile, Goliath's injuries have hindered his ability to glide, and while shielding Elisa, he makes a crash landing against a rooftop vent, rendering them unconscious on a splash page. They had just woken up, and the villains didn't even let them get their coffee before trying to murder them. That's just inconsiderate. Margot suggests apprehending the gargoyles because children aren't safe, when we see Cryptid Hound Bronx approach a baby, and gives him doggy kisses.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
This is Alex Xanatos, watched by Lexington, to whom he's taken a shine. Xanatos' wife and other former clan adversary Fox compliments Lex on how good he is with her son, but praise from her falls flat for the green dude.
Listen, I know you and I got off on the wrong foot. You tricked someone to trophy hunt him and his friend one time, and he never lets you forget it.
She wants to start over, since they'll be living together for the foreseeable future, and Lex is willing to try for Alex's sake. Xanatos has been watching this when his assistant Owen approaches, saying a Mr. Duval is on the phone, and it's implied it concerns the secretive group, the Illuminati. David will call back later, and when asked if it's wise to keep the mysterious organization waiting, he goes peak Xanatos by smiling, saying no, and joining his family.
Now, who needs a piggyback ride?
He'll wish he had specified who he was talking to when Bronx jumps on his back. Elisa dresses Goliath's wound until his stone sleep can heal him. In no condition to fight or glide, he has to get back to Castle Wyvern on foot, though Maza insists on going with. Margot goes on that gargoyles can be cared for and studied in captivity, which Macbeth says will cost them their freedom. Thinking these are little more than beasts they're discussing, she scoffs at the idea they have complex minds and emotions like humans.
Meanwhile, at the contradiction,
Broadway is studying Romeo and Juliet for his reading lesson, struggling to concentrate with Goliath out missing. Angela insists he's just late getting home, and reveals her frustration as to why the city hates her kind so much. She was raised by humans, and doesn't understand why there can't be harmony. Broadway insists it'll happen someday, and they proceed to kiss. The conventionally attractive woman with the heavy-set, undereducated guy? What do you think this is, a standard wacky sitcom marriage? This is observed by a sullen Brooklyn, and now you know why I mentioned the trio's competition for Angela when she arrived.
Parting is such sweet sorrow.
Still not the most hackneyed use of Shakespeare I've read in a comic. We return to Goliath latching onto a building with one hand, slipping a bit, with Elisa admitting it's sometimes easier she would stay behind as she changes position to hang on his back. If that'd come from him, she'd think he was calling her fat. Joking aside, it's an odd inclusion that was also not in the show. Besides this gentle look suggesting he isn't bothered, he doesn't respond to or counter the remark to reassure her. Just kind of something I would expect he would do. They climb to a roof across from the police station, the upper portion still damaged, when the quarry copter catches up to them. Goliath leaps across through one of the broken windows as Castaway and his van of sycophants arrive. He orders them to pair up and pursue the creature, needing to further encourage Vinny that this is the only way before the young man fully suits up and follows him.
I'm morally conflicted. These winged dudes might not be so dangerous, but I get to use a big hammer, and there are free donuts on Wednesdays, so I don't know what to think. Jeez!
Inside the precinct, Elisa and Goliath make short work of the goons, thinking it's finally over when they take out the two that had attacked them earlier. But that'd be too anticlimactic, so Castaway surprises them, using his hammer like a big taser to stun Goliath and knock Maza unconscious. So I guess the electricity does do more than look flashy. He has Vinny hold her while he finishes the gargoyle, reminding him that quarrymen must be anonymous. Johnny Dirtbag forces Goliath back toward a hole in the wall, ready to end it with one final jolt, but Vinny thinks he's learned his lesson. He's told this isn't about lessons, nor taking prisoners. This is war, and further implies Elisa will be executed for abandoning humanity. Vinny, setting the cop down and unmasking, says this isn't right, and Castaway labels him a traitor, lunging at him with his hammer. The discount Travolta is knocked back by an electrical blast, and Castaway pulls a gun to end him. But he seems to have forgotten about his primary target, who reaches from the shadows to crush the weapon. The cult leader attempts a massive swing with his hammer, but Goliath leaps out of the way, and his foe falls out the opening. Actually, his suddenly silent helicopter happened by at just the right angle at just the right time to not chop him up with propeller blades so he can catch the ladder.
Dream of me, Goliath! Dream of me! I'll be in the swimming pool full of guacamole next to the anteater with Christopher Walken's voice.
I don't know how Castaway learned of Goliath's name. In the show, Elisa shouted it when he got zapped, but that didn't happen here.
Goliath!
Also, as the helicopter gets further away, so does the moon. That's weird even for comics. Later, Vinny wakes up on a nearby rooftop, elated that Elisa and Goliath are alive. Though the shock from the hammer messed with his brain, so now, instead of John Travolta, he sounds like someone doing a cartoonish impression of Billy Crystal. He hopes this makes up for his revenge a few months back. I know time passes differently for cartoons, but that feels way too short a time span between the vendetta and these events, especially given Season 2's magic journey where time often passed slower for Goliath and crew than the rest of the world. I think a while back would have made more sense, but moving on. Vinny says he's taking a new job in Japan, so the Gargoyles will need to be more careful without him. Humoring the guy, Goliath says they'll try to manage without his protection. He descends via fire escape, and neither of our heroes are sure who he was, but we'll probably find out for himself eventually that Japan has gargoyles too. Perhaps therein lies the point Goliath has overlooked.
I have been frustrated, waiting for my clan to arrive at some kind of final destination.
You wanted your clan hunted by the specter of death and bumped off in impossibly off-kilter ways? Did that hammer use a few hundred volts too many on you, dude? He's realized the importance of making discoveries on the journey of life, and despite the hardships, he doesn't regret anything about the path he's chosen. And Elisa feels the same way. And for some reason the moon got all big again.
Dang it, Thanos! Either throw that moon or leave it alone. You're screwing up the tides!
As they take off for the castle once again, we go back to Night Watch, where the guests have devolved into bickering.
Madam, they burned witches like you in the Middle Ages.
Mister, you are living in a fantasy world.
We're in a comic book based on a cartoon. We're all living in a fantasy world.
However, they've run out of time, and the comic ends with Hudson turning off the TV as Travis Marshall signs off and hopes his audience sleeps well. And those were the first 2 issues of Slave Labor Graphics' Gargoyles. As much as I love the series and enjoy Weissman's work, I have mixed feelings about it. Remember when I said Goliath Chronicles had problems like weird takes for dialogue? That's not something you need to worry about reading a comic, because your imagination can make it sound right as you read, so it has that advantage. Also, being sequential still frames avoids choppy editing, but sometimes panel sequences felt a little weird. But the times they had silent panels letting some of the tension hang in the air helped set a moment's tone very well. The scene of Chavez taking the captain's chair back from Bluestone kind of felt pointless unless it's setting something up for one of the subsequent issues. Not that there'd be many of them, since the series was not only cancelled after about 12 issues, which were scheduled for once every 2 months, but the last few issues got collected into a single trade instead of individually. And it's a teensy little trade. I liked the scene of Goliath and that guy that was shooting at him. I don't know if Greg wanted it for the episode, but it got nixed by network censors, or he thought of it for the comic, but it's a great example of our hero's pragmatic temperament. Humans have feared and looked down at him before, despite his noble or benevolent intentions, and he could have done any number of intimidating tactics that would have been, if nothing else, fun for the reader to see. Snarl at him, threaten to break his arms, dangle him over the street so many stories below. But he just disables the deadly weapon so it can't hurt anyone else, while explaining that he's not one to be feared needlessly. Couple that with how, when Vinny hunted him down, looking at first like he posed a legitimate threat to his life, before the less threatening action he ended up taking, Goliath can be surprisingly chill when people are out to get him. It actually reminds me of a phrase from a retired Marine, Larry Cullen. Be strong enough to be gentle, which Goliath shows in spades. And incidentally, that Marine happened to be the brother of Peter Cullen, and was the inspiration for his Optimus Prime voice. The more you know. As to the story, it sees the beginning of a new chapter for the Gargoyles, one where they're less able to hide because everyone knows they exist. It's a natural progression of their story, just like the Quarrymen, a group composed of people scared of the unknown variables of their existence. Even though Chronicles had its faults, there's an essay to be made about John Castaway as a manipulator that preys on fear and people's lack of knowledge. And not just, here's a fact or person or something you don't agree with, but something that seems scary because of what you don't know. Castaway's whole speech is stochastic terrorism worthy of his own Fox News show, but one line in particular is worth noting.
Now, something alien and horrible has entered your world.
He plays on both fear of the unknown and a basic human desire for belonging and community. After pretending to sympathize with their struggles, he shows them a garishly evil-looking effigy of their enemy to amplify trepidation, asks the crowd if they're afraid of these creatures coming for their children despite there being zero evidence for that statement, He demonstrates that he has hammers that can shatter gargoyles with ease and offers them to the crowd, and with them the illusion of having power to take back control. Except anyone who watched the show, and if you haven't, Goliath follows up with it, they're not alien. They're as natural to the earth as humans, plants, and animals. They've always existed, with their own culture and traditions. Goliath's clan were victims of treachery and attempted genocide after long protecting humans, even when they were mistreated. One must wonder how many of these people would still be afraid of the Manhattan Clan if they knew what they had gone through, the ways they stopped dangerous criminals and protected innocent people, even after being double-crossed and having to adapt to new surroundings. And the sad part is, there are too many people in real life like John Castaway, using people's lack of knowledge on any number of subjects just so they can get fame or power or money or status. It's what makes the guy a really good idea for an antagonist to the Gargoyles in their new status quo, but can feel painfully relevant to the current sociological climate. Okay, now here's a funny clip to decompress.
How can we get back on the right track?
And to his credit, Vinny proved to be an excellent counter. He was briefly swept up in mob mentality, but saw for himself that things were not the way Castaway had claimed. It takes someone with a great deal of humility to turn away from the almost comforting delusion of the kind of madness the Quarrymen are based in. You might even think that Vinny should have used his own hammer to fight his would-be leader, that it was either a writer's oversight or a dumb decision by a dumb guy. But perhaps it's better that he didn't. Vinny isn't a weapon. He's not a blunt instrument meant only for destruction. He doesn't want to hurt or kill anyone or anything. So instead, he rejects the hammer and what it represents to become a shield, instinctively protecting those at risk when he sees real evil, even at the cost of personal safety. I, on the other hand, only use my hammer for good. The art has its moments of cheesecake, such as frequent ample cleavage, even if it seems kind of absurd, and a slight shot of Elisa's undies when she sweep kicks a guy, but mostly tame compared to some other comics I've read. However, there is something that feels off to me, but I do hesitate to call it outright bad. Some quality of the line work and shading feel unpolished, the coloring having a kind of splotchy look to it, but I feel like that may be just the style of the artists, which is fine. It's not a problem to distinguish your look from others, but I'd be lying if I said my personal preferences wouldn't lie elsewhere. As a starting point for a new era for these characters, it's a pretty good one, with some bonus scenes not seen in its animated counterpart. The art may be an acquired taste, and some panel progression felt weird, but it definitely gives you a lot to think about if you're willing. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.